Since we started Dying to Tell You over a year ago, I've encountered many healthcare professionals in person and on social media that have listened to the podcast. Often, the stories shared on the podcast sparks a memory of a story in their own career that has deeply affected them. As healthcare professionals, our patients are often our greatest teachers. The things we encounter as we care for patients and families from varied backgrounds helps us to expand our minds and breadth of experience, changing the way we practice and sometimes the way we live our lives. I wanted people to have the benefit of hearing some of those life-changing stories, to hear from these people that dedicate their lives to caring for the sick, especially those who care for people at the end of their lives. I wanted Dying to Tell You listeners to hear another perspective. So I've invited some friends to tell some tales about the things they've encountered that have changed their lives. This is Dying to Tell You, the Caring Perspective. So today we have with us Dr. Jared Rubenstein. He is the palliative care video guy. That's how I know him. I'm a huge fan of your videos.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think I just saw. Did you do a new one recently?
Yeah, within the last few weeks.
I think I saw it. All right. Dr. Jared Rubenstein, maybe you could tell us a little about yourself, where you are, and where you practice.
Sure. Hey, so thanks so much for having me, Cody. I really appreciate your platform. So yeah, I'm a pediatric palliative care doctor here in Houston, Texas, and I work at a children's hospital here on the palliative care team. I'm also a medical educator and fellowship director, and so I run a lot of the educational programs at our place. And for me, I like teaching people about palliative care as much as I like practicing it. I feel like I sort of happened into the greatest field in the world, and I love it. Every day we get the question a lot, what do you do? That's so sad, or how can you do that? And it can be, but for me, I think it's really powerful to get to feel like we're meeting these children and families at some of the hardest times in their life and working to positively impact that.
Did you start out as a pediatrician and then moved into palliative care, or did you?
Yeah. So my path was a little windy. I actually came into med school sort of interested in palliative care from just conversations. My dad was an adult critical care doctor and talked a lot about his end of life patients around the dinner table when we were kids. And that always just stuck out as something important and worthwhile. And when I went to med school, I realized like that was a whole field called palliative care and was all set to do that. And then I did my pediatrics training later and loved that and thought, is pediatric palliative care even a thing? And it was just starting to be kind of a little bit before that. And now the field's really grown. And it's been great to now feel like I'm in this field that is much bigger than it used to be, but very much still growing and still hoping for more people to join, but have really found a home in that I can't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah. I can imagine. I mean, I get it all the time. Like, oh, that must be so sad. I imagine it's even more so for you. But knowing what I know about my work, I have to say what a special job you have, and what a privilege it must be to be there for those patients and families. I'm sure you're working with families just as much as you are with the kids. So
thank you. It absolutely is. It feels like it's a total honor to be able to meet people where they are and try to help them live each day a little bit better than it would be otherwise.
Yeah. So great. All right. So you are here to tell me a story that kind of changed the way that you practice or the way you see life, or both. So what do you got? Tell me a story.
Absolutely. So I'm going to talk about our experience at our institution working with the dignity therapy intervention. So it's, for those who don't know, it was started in Winnipeg, Canada by a Dr. Harvey Chachanov and his colleagues. So it was a psychiatrist working with adults with cancer near the end of their lives. And it was a way to, perform a life review and create a story and a legacy document. And it's remarkable and shown that, they realized that when they were taking care of people at the end of their life, aside from the pain and symptoms and other kinds of suffering, people experienced a loss of dignity. And they created this intervention that's sort of part interview, life review, part leaving wisdom for those that are left behind, and found that it really positively impacted people at the end of their lives. And when I learned about it, I was really intrigued. And I'll give a shout out to one of my colleagues at the time, Taryn Schulke, who said, we should do that in pediatrics. And so we convinced our team to send us to Winnipeg, and we did the training and brought it back and had big aspirations of seeing, if we could do this in pediatrics. And I think originally there was a lot of concern that, how can it's built around being able to talk to someone about the fact that they're at the end of their life and name that and have conversations in that. And in pediatrics, it can often feel like it's a well-meaning conspiracy, but sort of a conspiracy between medical teams and the child's parents to shield them from that and protect them from talking about the hard things at the end of their life. But what those of us that do the work know is that, we see that children and adolescents want to talk about it, and they see and feel what's happening to their body. And the term for it's mutual pretense, where, the children feel what's happening to their body. The parents see what's happening, but the parents try to protect their children in a way that's, of course, well-meaning. And as a parent, that's your job, is to shield your kid from hard things. And then the kids get the cue that, I feel like something really bad's happening, but my parents don't want to seem to talk about it. So I don't want to stress them. So I'm not going to talk about it either. And you get the kid in the hospital bed sad and quiet. And you get the parents on the other side of the room sad and quiet. And I think a lot of times it feels like our work is seeing if we can get them together and talk about it. And so that was kind of the model that we came to trying to modify this dignity therapy intervention for the pediatric population with. And it was just this mind-blowing experience. And to this day, it's been the most profoundly impactful trainings I've gone through and experiences I've had in my career, to be able to have these conversations and talk to children and adolescents and young adults and give them space to talk about that they're at the end of their life, and talk about the moments that they're proudest of, talk about when they felt most alive, talk about any regrets they have, talk about wisdom that they have either for other kids going through something similar or messages they want to leave for their parents and families. And it's some of the stories we had are just remarkable. Like, met a young woman who was dying from cancer that was able to show sort of the power of these stories, that people assume that anyone who's going to be in that state and talking, it's going to be this very sad, morbid conversation. And there were certainly elements of sadness, but her story included being in elementary school. When I asked her what her earliest memory was, it was that she was in her class and a kid in front of her was kind of bullying her and punched her in the stomach. And so she responded by punching him in the face, and is just telling the story and giggling about how they got sent to the principal's office. And then once she initially was in trouble, but then when the full story came out about who started it and what happened, that boy got punished and she got to go back to her class, and was just reveling in that when she's, days from the end of her life and in what's otherwise a challenging conversation, being able to find moments of joy like that. Yeah. And using this intervention and this process to be able to allow her to share and document that moment of joy from earlier in her life was powerful for her in the moment, but then also knowing that it'll be powerful for her family to be able to have this document after she dies. We met another young woman who had one of the harder life stories I've ever heard, and was talking about being born in prison and coming out and living with a family member, and just sort of continued difficulty after difficulty. And we agonized really when we were doing this recording, thinking, is she talking about all these things? Is she re-traumatizing herself? Should we not be having this conversation? And afterwards, when we read her story back to her, she was just completely silent the whole time, which doesn't usually happen. Normally in the read back phase, there's laughing and yelling stuff out and asking questions and interjecting. And she was just completely silent. And I was kind of freaking out. And afterwards, I looked at her and I said, well, that's your story. What do you think? And she said, it's perfect. And I said, okay, good. Like, I'm glad you like it. Now's your chance where you can add stuff in that we may have forgotten. You can take stuff out. And she just looked at me and said, I said, it's perfect. And so that was it. And we cut and printed there. And part of the way she reclaimed her narrative and found dignity at the end of her life was for being able to share that story with everyone. And anyone that came to her room, she would ask to read that and sort of experience her life in that way. And she found a lot of power in kind of reclaiming her challenging life story in that. And for me, I mean, there's an endless number of stories like that. And for me, I think the most powerful thing was this clear-cut pushback against the popular narrative of children should be protected from scary things, shouldn't be allowed to talk about from these things, aren't able to talk about these things. And in a way that time and time again, we just saw in incredibly powerful ways, not only can they, but they want to, and it can be healing just in the same way it can for adults.
Yeah. What is that? Do you think that? I mean, I know that like talking about difficult emotions often takes away the power of that emotion. What do you think it is about telling this story, the life story, that is healing for people, or as
I
kids
think,
especially?
yeah, I think a big part of it, at least in what in the adult model and what the literature showed, was that, there's so much that's lost to serious illness, and people lose their life roles. People lose dignity and feeling like they're now dependent on others after being the provider their whole lives. People lose so much. And in being able to kind of relive some of the high points and glories and proudest moments of their life, it gives it back to some extent. And it reminds them and reminds everyone around them who they are and who they've been and who they still are. And in kids, I think it's very much the same thing. I think for a lot of our patients, where they spend months or years of their short lives in the hospital, and giving them a chance to have a voice and control of something where they're so often have their voices taken away and they so often have control taken away. And I think for kids also, it's a chance to talk about the things that they didn't get to do but wanted to, and a chance to kind of live in those dreams for a little bit in a way that I think a lot of people worry about opening the door of, because they worry about the damage it would do to remind them of things that they don't have and maybe will never have. But that's not the experience we've had at all. That I think being able to talk about dreams, it's the same way, we always have that narrative of people say, oh, in palliative care, don't take away hope. And we have to remind people that, like, that's not a thing that happens. Yeah. Hope's not a thing that anyone has the power to give or take. It's a thing people do, and people keep hoping for things through the end of their lives. And I think the same way for these children, that there may be a part of them that knows that they won't achieve these dreams, but being able to talk about them and imagine them, I think, is powerful in that same way. That it's impossible to totally take away a dream, and we should celebrate that they have them and want to talk about them.
Can you tell me, I mean, what do kids do with the unfulfilled dreams?
It's a big question for an evening. I think they share them. I think in part they hold on to them for themselves and think about them and fantasize about them to some extent. And I think in part they talk about them and they share them with others, and that describing them and being able to kind of live them out in their mind to some extent, if that's the closest they can ever be, can still be powerful and still be healing, and still lets them know that they're that person that has those dreams.
Yeah. Whether we talk about it or not, it's happening. And so I think talking about it, airing it out, is probably always better than stuffing it down and not, pretending like it's not there.
Absolutely.
I wonder, at least for adults, young adults, 40s, 50s, people say, they're gone before their time. And I think we all, I don't know, maybe not we all, I have this kind of subconscious belief that I'm due like 80 years, 75 years, 80 years. And like, if I don't get that, then somehow I've been wronged or something is wrong. I'm gone before my time. I had a nurse that I worked with a while, and she said, well, obviously it's not before their time, because their time is now, which is, she was being funny, but it's a very
classic nurse
powerful
wisdom.
Right. Yeah. It's a very powerful truth. Do you encounter children who have that sense, like they're getting the short end of the stick on this?
Absolutely, but often I think not as much as people might imagine. Yeah. I think it's much more that everyone around them feels that. and it is. I mean, there's something profoundly wrong about a child dying. It feels it's against the natural order. And you're right, whether or not everyone has a mental picture of how many years they're owed, I think everyone has a vision for what they want their life to look like in one way or another. Yeah. And nobody envisions dying as a child. And so on the one hand, there's this profound wrongness to it, but on the other hand, it's all they've ever had and it's all they've ever known. And to some extent, I feel like saying it was cut too short, to some extent, minimizes all they've done and all they've had and all they've experienced. And like I've taken care of people who have died in infancy, and in talking to their parents, it's clear that their life story became for as soon as they thought about wanting to have a baby, and that they've had all these hopes and aspirations for who that child would be. And if they live for an hour or a day or a week, that's still their whole life. And I think we see all the time how much life can be fit into whatever limited span somebody's given. And I think, I mean, on the one hand, absolutely, there's an inherent wrongness and unfairness to it. And on the other hand, exactly like that nurse said, people's life, however long it is, that's how long it is. And I think part of our role and part of our honor is to be able to honor that and celebrate whatever time they've had and whatever they were able to do and make use of.
Mm. Yeah. So this project, these stories that you've kind of recounted, they're very powerful, obviously. What has changed in the way that you see your work, or the way that you practice, or the way that you see life as you've kind of encountered these people?
I think for one, just sort of the richness of everyone, and that everyone, when you take time and sit and spend an hour with someone, maybe it's sort of the experience you have with a podcast, that if you sit and talk to someone for an hour, you learn so much of it. Like, when else in life do you get to sit and talk to someone for an hour other than maybe doing dignity therapy and in a podcast or a palliative care consult? And I think
that's right.
I mean, that's one of the favorite things about my job, is that sometimes we just get to go sit and talk to people for an hour, and seeing like how much you can learn about someone in a dedicated hour conversation of them about their life and what their values are and what's most important to them. I think the dignity therapy creators had what they sort of pared down to it is kind of the solidification of the whole thing, what they call the patient dignity question, which is, what do I need to know about you to take the best care of you? And that's a question I ask whenever I meet somebody now, because I think that's what we want to know. That's like, what do they think is most important? It's probably not the same thing that we think is most important, but we won't know unless we ask. And for me, I think the biggest change is more just sort of the proof of concept and the reassurance that, like, it's absolutely the right thing to do to create space for kids to be able to talk about these things, and not to force it, and not to say that every child who's dying has to be made to talk about the end of their life if they don't want to. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But in our experience, I think we found that most of them want to. And if the door's opened, they'll walk through and feel a huge relief afterwards, and feel a sense of peace at being able to name the thing that was previously unnameable, and given space to talk about the things that were previously unspeakable. And especially knowing the way kids' imaginations work, that is often that what they're thinking about or worried about might be scarier than reality. And creating space to hear what their worry is and talk about whether or not it's something that might happen, and then sort of normalize and talk about what we think might happen, can be really healing and powerful. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm not sure I can really think of any examples where somebody that wanted to have the conversation was able to have it and wasn't relieved and didn't have some sense of peace after.
Yeah. Are there kids that don't want to talk about it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we all sort of get a sense of, from them, and we'll ask. And I think there's sort of just big kind of surface level questions that we can use as screeners. Like, do you want to talk about what's happening with your body? Is there anything you're worried about? Sort of opening the door to that and seeing what they do with it. And a lot of kids do want to talk about it, but some don't. And then we say, okay, great. Like, if that changes, or if you have questions later and you want to talk about it, like, we're a safe space where you can always ask these things, and we're here, and we and your parents want to be able to talk with you about this if you want to. But if you don't want to, that's okay too. And tell us, like, what do you want to talk about? And sometimes it's a totally different conversation. I think also it's a great way to leverage our multidisciplinary wiser colleagues in things like the expressive therapy. So like art therapy or music therapy. Like, I think we've had kids that have been able to write something that they weren't comfortable talking about in words. We've had a child, I remember, that worked with our multimedia team to sort of create like a stop motion animation play that once you looked at it for more than 5 seconds, you knew that it was him sort of sharing his thoughts and fears and worries about the end of his life, because he hadn't been given space to talk about it. And people thought he didn't want to, but he very much did. He just talked about it with actions and with a story creation and with art and music. And I think sort of leveraging our colleagues to do things like that has been really powerful. There was a chaplain I used to work with. Her name's Kirsten Springmeyer, who did a spiritual activity called The Path, where she had it's like a little sort of ring binder kind of thing that had just different pictures of paths out in the world. And she would allow the child to flip through it and say, which path speaks to you? And they'd pick whichever picture it was, and they'd spend a while talking about it. And it would be a way for the child and her to kind of process what their spiritual journey was and what they were thinking about at the end of life. Like if it was a path that went into darkness or a cave, like what that meant for them. If it was a path to the beach, what that meant to them, and sort of giving them, like, thinking about all the different ways that people can process and talk about things. And it's another one of those things that I think, while it's something we do and kind of gravitate to in the pediatrics world, it's, I think, something that everyone would benefit from, because as much as we say in pediatrics that, kids aren't just small adults, I'm not at all convinced that adults aren't just big kids. And I think a lot of the things that we found that work and help open these doors and conversations in kids would work in grownups too.
Sure. Of course. I mean, I find a lot of times there's patients and families, and each of them is trying to protect the other from the sadness of what's happening. And in reality, they both want to talk about it, and they just think the other doesn't. And if you can name that and get in the room and start that conversation, things go so much better.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I know you're very passionate about education and about palliative care. I also am very passionate about palliative care. Would you maybe just share a thing or two that you think general public should know about palliative care that they probably don't?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing is that it's empowering, and it's a way to be able to have control of something that's inherently pretty out of your control, and a way to, we always talk about, there's this promise of like personalized medicine when we sequence everyone's genes and then like everyone gets exactly the right medicine for you. But we've been practicing personalized medicine for years by getting to know people and making sure that the healthcare that they're offered fits in with what their priorities and values are. And I think there's this sense that, to me, palliative care is everything like most people want from life. Like, it's a chance to have it personalized for you. It's a chance to have your values honored. It's a chance to try to make each day better than it would be otherwise. And there's all these narratives largely coming from others in the healthcare field that it's something that's scary or something that's negative or means that we failed. But nothing could be further from the truth. I think if you have a serious illness, there's some way that meeting a palliative care team can make your life better. And I think that's the biggest takeaway I wish more people knew, is that it's only a value add.
Yeah, it's really true. It really is a value add. And we're so easy to get rid of. If you don't want us in the room, we'll leave. That's what I always say.
Yeah.
Let me talk to you. If you don't want me here, I'll go. I'm very good at reading the room. If I'm not wanted, I don't want to be there.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, for telling a story, and for sharing about palliative care, and especially about this work with these kids. And again, just thank you for what you do, and for doing that. Really, I mean, it's excellent work. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I love listening to your show. I love the platform and how you use it to get the word out. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Where can we find all your videos?
Oh, yeah. So my YouTube channel is just my name, Jared Rubenstein, on YouTube. And it's got a series of videos about palliative care and some other things, little 1 or 2 minute animated videos to help people talk about hard things. You know, as a kid that grew up on The Simpsons and South Park, I realized that, a little bit of humor, satire, and animation can open the door to bigger conversations. And that's what I'm hoping to be able to do with this.
Yeah. They're great and they're hilarious. And I've used them in my presentations. So thank you. Yeah, no, thank you.
It's really nice to hear.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I think we did it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared, for taking time to share your story and your work on the podcast. It's really a gift when a person finds the work for which they're perfectly suited, and it seems pretty obvious that you're one of those people. Be sure to check out Jared's YouTube channel at Dr. J. Rubenstein. His videos about palliative care are informative and fun. Thank you for listening to The Caring Perspective. We're working on Season 3 of Dying to Tell You right now. We have several excellent interviews of people living with serious illness already recorded, but we're always looking for more. So if you or a loved one is living with a life-limiting illness, you do have a story to tell. I would love to work with you to tell that story on the podcast. You can go to our website, dttypodcast.com, and click the Share Your Story link to get started. Remember, you can watch all episodes of The Caring Perspective on YouTube, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have more guests coming each week with thoughtful stories of hope and learning at the end of life. Thanks again for listening. This is Dying to Tell You, The Caring Perspective.